Join now via Zoom, host of Big 12 Watch, Josh Neighbors, with us. And Josh, thank you you were one of many texts that I got, but you were one of the first ones that I got on Sunday, trying to give me a little bit of comfort from, the most painful sports day of my life. But I appreciate that. We'll just start right out. Like, we're in the postseason now. Your thoughts on the CFP and the process? I think we collectively are all happy that the 14 playoff is going away. Probably none more happy than me, but your thoughts on the nonsense that happened this week?
Yeah. So thanks for having me on, guys. I always like joining you all. Obviously, I think the games have to matter drum is the one that I'm going to keep beating. And, I'm a big believer that they should be rewarded for winning without their starting quarterback and their backup quarterback. Louisville really never had a chance in that game. They were terrible the entire time. I mean, the Florida State defense was awesome, and a perfect season in a power conference should be rewarded. Alabama lost a game. I know that, keeping out, I really don't even know, if this is an SEC, ACC type deal. I go back to the article. I think it was Dennis Dodd this week who had the piece. It was we just watched them and thought they just couldn't win a championship. And honestly, I would give them a decent shot if they had to play Washington in the playoff game. We didn't give TCU a very good shot of winning a championship. And did they? No, but at least they won a game and they got their way into a championship game. So, yeah, the criteria changes year to year, and I guess it's okay. If it's a year-to-year type deal, who is more deserving, what we value is always going to change based off of teams available. But to me, Florida State plays 2 non-conference games and that are against SEC opponents, wins them both, one handily, and then one they go on the road. And I know Florida's not great, but they still did. And I asked myself all year, if this is an SEC deal, what was the SEC's best non-conference win? Right? Was it Missouri beating K-State at the last second via field goal? Was it Kentucky over Louisville? The SEC was not some overwhelming superpower out of conference, especially this year. And so I think Alabama did a really good job of rebounding after their loss to Texas and kind of, coming together as a team this year. But, man, you still look like Alabama did lose by double digits at home against Texas this year. That game did happen. I know it happened in September or whatever, but to me, to be the SEC champion has to get in. I think it was almost like they kind of willed them in. And also, I think they also paired that up with the idea of, FSU just can't win a championship, which, look, man, Washington was a 10-point dog last week and they won the game outright and never, they really, the second half rally, Oregon comes ahead, then Washington puts their foot down basically. So, I think it's why it's hey, we can prognosticate all we want. That's part of their job, but also resume has to matter. And I know some folks are saying, oh, you're not what your resume says you are. And the end of me, I think, that's the best indication we have. All we really have is what you've done this year, and FSU didn't lose. So tough.
Josh, the Big 12 had one job: don't let Oklahoma or Texas win the title. And sure enough, Texas goes and beats up Oklahoma State last week. It's crazy because with all the playoff drama, the games sort of just get lost from last weekend in some ways in the bigger conversation. What were your thoughts on the Longhorns and how they took care of business against the Cowboys? And man, they got a pretty favorable draw travel-wise, matchup-wise. I think that they look pretty good in this playoff system, but what do you think about the Big 12 champs?
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's yes, you're right, Craig. It's the final season of, the final season of the Big 12. You don't want Texas and Oklahoma to win it. But to me, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because in the last 4 Big 12 championship games, we have had 7 different teams. And in the last 4 seasons, dating back to 2020, we have had 4 separate Big 12 champions. And so, I think the part about this is that's actually been the calling card of this league is the parity in it, right? And even so much, the parity to the point where look at the performance of teams that go to the Big 12 championship. The follow-up season for a lot of them has been underwhelming, right? Iowa State's 2021 was underwhelming. Baylor and Oklahoma State both had really underwhelming 2022 campaigns. TCU with a massively underwhelming 2023 campaign this year. And, I think K-State was pretty decent, to be honest. like kind of plotting 8-4, which is kind of the way K-State football has been. So yeah, I mean, like it kind of makes sense that it was Texas's time. Here is what I will say: if you take every team that was in a Big 12 championship game in the last 4 seasons and you put them head to head against this Texas team on a neutral field, I feel pretty confident that this Texas team would be favored in all of those games. And not only that, I feel pretty confident that they would win the game. TCU last year may be a bit of an outlier, right? I think that TCU team could exploit some of the stuff that Texas does not do very well in terms of coverage. But yeah, I mean, this Texas team is like, they are the last 2 weeks. They have been an absolute hammer. I mean, they have not played a competitive second half of football in the last 3 weeks or so. And I've been really impressed about that and that performance. So I think there's 2 ways to look at it. Number one, this league has always had turnover. So in that sense, I wish the national storyline too would be more about that, but it's never going to be. It's always going to be about Texas in the last year getting the job done. And it should be, because I actually do think this team is a national championship contender because of how good they've looked. We know their obvious weakness, but man, Steve Sarkisian has just done a great job designing the offense and getting the playmakers the ball, even as their playmakers have gone out. Quinn Ewers and obviously Jonathan Brooks, they've continued to impress me. Honestly, they've actually gotten a little bit better since losing Jonathan Brooks about the totality of the offense.
So you mentioned Washington earlier and how Florida State would maybe match up best with them in the playoff. I actually think it's also maybe Michigan too, because they don't have a high-flying offense. But Texas and Washington, this thing could get wild, and they both have pretty good defenses, but I kind of think that Texas and Washington could wind up like the Oregon and Washington games. Am I wrong here?
Yeah, it's funny. I'd love to know what you all think about this too. I think Washington's the team that Texas would least like to play. I think that's actually like offense versus defense. So Texas offense against Washington's defense, like sure, that's probably the defense you want to face the most. But if there is one team in the playoff that's most equipped to beat Texas, it's actually Washington because of the weapons they have and because of their offense. And here's the thing is, I think Washington's going to live in a lot of second and long, third and long situations because I don't know how much of successful running the football they're going to do. Because guys, when's the last time we saw a team successfully run the rock? And like Texas Tech did some, but also did it mean anything? Did any of Texas Tech's rushing yards mean actually anything in that game? No, they didn't.
Yeah.
So I actually think that's what makes this interesting, because if you said, hey, Texas take on Bama, well, Bama looks a lot better. But guess what? This Texas team would be like, sure, yeah, we'll play them again neutral field. What do we do in their own stadium? We beat them by 10. So, I think we like our chances if we line them up again. And look, they might lose that game, but like, why shouldn't they be confident about that? And then also, too, for Michigan, that Michigan offense, guys, leaves a lot to be desired. So maybe Michigan's defense gets some stops, but like, how many points do you think Texas needs to win that game? I think Sark is like, if I get 27, do we win? So I think there's a pretty good chance we win. If we get like 27, 28 points in that game. And I look, if there's a certain point number, I usually think we like Texas' chance to reach that point number. So this matchup is really interesting because, hey, Penix and Adunze and Polk, I mean, they've got a bunch of guys across the board that can hurt you on offense. And I think the big question is, like, will Washington be able to run the ball all effectively? And will it really matter? Like, I don't think they want to throw the ball 60 times in the game, but hey, if they have to, they can. And they have a full month to prepare too. So I'm pretty fired up. Like, yeah, this thing, can this thing definitely get wild? Oh yeah, this thing can get pointsy.
Josh, some other news going on around just the league in college football. The carousel kind of grinded to a halt. We just saw Tulane fill, but now Troy's open, obviously. But your thoughts on the big decision down in H-Town with Willie Fritz making the move over from Tulane to now be the man in charge of the Cougars. Got a big background in Texas, obviously. But what did you think of that hire from H-Town?
Well, I think when we look at what has worked for Big 12 schools in terms of hiring, right? And let's look at a couple of the most recent hires. How has the hire worked out for Kansas State with Chris Kleiman? I would say it's worked out pretty well.
Yep.
How has the hire worked out at Kansas for Lance Leipold? I'd say it's worked out pretty well. Those are guys who I believe when they were hired, all in their 50s, right? Willie Fritz is 60. And if you look at their track records, they have won at every single stop on their head coaching resume. And sometimes, like when you hire a guy, that's kind of just what you want. And I know, Willie Fritz, showing that energy at the press conference, I love it. I don't think it's necessarily that's not really what he brings to the table, though. You're talking about a craftsman, a guy who's done a really good job of cultivating rosters, cultivating teams, developing players, developing talent. And I think that model works. And I think Houston football, that's what they need. They their effort this year, it was so inconsistent at Houston. That Texas game, man, they were really impressive with the amount of that, just how they showed up. Right. And that run Texas had no answers for them for a large portion of that game and almost lost the game. And the UTSA game, that's the first game of the season. Man, that was impressive. But they had that Rice game, complete debacle. They got boat raced by Kansas State, which you could probably see coming a mile away. Right. That's their problem. That is how up and down they were. And I think Willie Fritz adds a level of stability. And also, he reminds me of the other coaching hires in this league recently that have brought some stability and success. And if you even want to say, hey, Gus Malzahn at UCF, sure, because, guys, there was only one team out of the new four that made a bowl game, and that was UCF. So I would even say that's been a good hire for them so far. Yeah, I think kind of the elder statesman is a good move for these schools, and I expect it to be a good move for Houston. I don't think it guarantees a conference title or anything, but I think a bit more consistent winning than they were doing. It won't be as much of a up and down situation. We're going to have a bit more of a plateau, steady, or win-loss record each year.
Your thoughts on kind of the early returns of the transfer portal and some of those guys that are out there? Look, Baylor's probably going to need a quarterback. Cincinnati got a quarterback already. There's going to be some movement. Texas is going to be very portal heavy. Of course, they're leaving, so it doesn't really matter in terms of the Big 12. But anything really shock you early on, or guys that interest you in the transfer portal?
Yeah. So, I think this one's interesting, guys. And I talked about this last week, and I'm not sure we're talking about it enough. I'm not sure if I talked about it with you guys, but the last two Big 12 championship winning quarterbacks in the portal still is pretty crazy thing, right? Uh-huh. Well, at least obviously predates last week. Quinn Ewers now is still in Texas, so we have to give him that. But that's really interesting. Blake Shapen and the situations are obviously very different. You all have better read the Shapen thing. I know they're talking to him, trying to get him back. I don't really know where we are at that point. That feels like it's probably not going to happen, right?
Yeah, it's continuing on. It's just I asked Grayson a little while. It's at what point do they just? I think it's just going to come to a point where either Blake Shapen commits somewhere else or Baylor gets a quarterback, and that just answers the question itself. That seems like kind of where we are right now. But yeah, it's looking like it's probably the end of the road. I'd say 60-40 end of the road.
Yeah, maybe it should be. I think for Will Howard too. That was a point where they've got 3 more years of Avery Johnson's eligibility, and I think I think for them now losing Colin Klein's a huge loss, obviously. But those are guys we talked about those. Those coaches a second ago. They're good coaches. That's kind of the expectation. I think at some point Leipold and Kleiman expect to lose coordinators. Why? Because they're going to have good coordinators with the way that their teams are coached. So I don't think there's much of a secret at K-State what they want to do with their quarterbacks. So I think it's the good news for K-State is you lost a guy who I think is pretty good, and he's going to go somewhere where I think it's going to be more of a passing offense, right? And then obviously, we're seeing a situation happen at Baylor where I think Spottle comes in and they're probably looking for a new quarterback. I just saw one that came across in terms of quarterbacks that was really interesting to me. That was Curtis Rourke, who I like a lot.
Yeah,
taking visits to Indiana and Wake Forest. Guys, I watch a lot of action. I love to bet on those Tuesday night games. Curtis Rourke is really good and has been really good for a while. And that is a guy that I think some upper level Power Fives would just love to have a guy who's competent and good like Curtis Rourke and has played a lot of football and has seen a lot of things. And so I'm surprised that places like Wake Forest and Indiana would be the next stop for a guy who I think can play at a lot, no disrespect to those programs, other places. And I know I saw the JMU quarterback too. Is he going to follow Kurt Signetti there? It's interesting. But yeah, the quarterback movement is obviously the biggest question here for a lot of it. And, I'm curious about Oklahoma State. Like, what does their quarterback situation look like next year? Donovan Smith at Houston, is he gonna enter the portal? What's UCF gonna do? Right? There's some really good coaches who are gonna have some decisions to make on quarterbacks next year in the Big 12, and we'll see if it's guys who are on the roster, guys they are recruiting, or if it's guys that show up in the portal. TCU, Josh Hoover, like, is that the guy? I mean, we're waiting on KJ Jefferson to reignite with Kendall Riles. What's going to happen there?
There was somebody, golly, and I've lost it, that it was visiting UCF that would have been like an excellent fit for them.
Oh, Grayson McCall.
Grayson McCall. Yeah, there we go. Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my God, could you imagine that? That's fantastic. That's a match made in heaven, right? I mean, you see so much of what I know that the offense this year, I think, changed a little bit for Coastal, but if you look at the offense that they ran, I mean, it's basically shotgun triple option that they were running a whole lot of when Jamie Chadwell was there. I think it'd be really interesting to see. Gus Malzahn's offense is just so motion heavy, right, and so reliant on movement and different guys, different places and stuff. I think McCall would be a pretty natural fit in that offense. So I love to hear about that move, and I think that'd be an excellent fit if that does happen.
So, Josh, big news there with Kansas's coaching staff losing OC Andy Kotelnicki to Penn State. A great hire for the Nittany Lions, but they go and hire Jeff Grimes from Baylor, and I saw a lot of confusion on Kansas fans' parts about, well, didn't Baylor kind of suck on offense? It's like, yeah, but that was also personnel, bad O-line, things like that. Kansas already has plenty of familiarity with the wide zone, so he's stepping into a situation where he's a self-proclaimed master of the wide zone himself. I think it's a hire that makes a ton of sense. What do you think about Grimes to KU?
I'm with you, because if you think about what they're trying to do there, like Jalen Daniels is coming back, right? So what they're trying to do right now at Kansas is, stack winning seasons, right? And I think a move like this is Kotelnicki's creativity was his biggest asset. And I forget the guy's name. The quarterback coach last name starts with Z. I forget his name, but he's staying on as co-OC, I believe, or at least the bowl game, right? And so you're hoping that some of the lower level guys on the staff might bring the ideas. I think Grimes kind of brings that steady-handed, the wide zone stuff. Like a lot of that stuff's going to be the foundation of our offense, and people know that. And so just keeping on the tracks, keeping everything going. Maintain a lot of those ideas you had last year. Throw that stuff in. It's on tape, so it's not you're going to forget it happens because Kotelnicki's gone. Now the new ideas are what you're missing out on here, ostensibly, right? But I just like the kind of the idea for Kansas football of trying to keep the train on the tracks, because this is what program development looks like. The fact that they went from, what was it, his first season, 2 or 3 wins to 6 to 8. I mean, look, there's going to be some regression at some point, but if they win another 6 and 7 next year, especially if Daniels is not able to be quarterback the entire season, that's going to be another really impressive thing. I mean, they just keep stacking winning seasons. That's what Kansas football wants to do, because that means that you're building a program. You're building something that can hopefully last there at Kansas. And I think Jeff Grimes is a step in helping them get there. It's not going to be the sexiest hire. It's not some young innovative hire. It's let's just keep this thing where it's at, because where it's at is not where it's actually been in the past, right? It's not about elevating. It's about let's get to a level we can sustain.
Absolutely. Josh, thanks so much, man. Always love talking to you. Josh Neighbors, Big 12 Watch, Crystal Ball College Football. Please go like and subscribe to that channel and watch him.